The thumbnail is not clickbait. The title is not clickbait. I've done it. I've made the best damn build in Diablo 4. Completely immune to all damage, infinite damage, insane, ridiculous mechanics, only requires like 1 to 2 different bugs to work. And luckily, with the mid-season patch coming like just around the corner, I don't think it's getting fixed anytime soon. Let me just go ahead and introduce you to the build though. Right. You can do that. And it is the nuttiest, most insane thing I've ever piloted in this game. Let's go ahead and get into it. Now, this infinite recasting of Blood Mist glitch is not something new to us, and while I was not the first person to find it, in fact, I believe that was Chronix, the reason why Chronix was able to come across it before me, the differentiator, is this thing doesn't work on controller. No, it very specifically deals with how the game is able to input your mouse and keyboard as opposed to how it inputs your controller. But what it basically does is all hinge around a single aspect that basically should have absolutely no impact on how this skill works, but the change from it not going on cooldown until the end of the skill or when you cancel the skill, and the fact that you can actually input before that happens because you put on the creeping mist aspect, and lo and behold, you can infinitely trigger Blood Mist. Now, the funny part is every single thing that you think of when I say infinitely cast Blood Mist, you might hear an oldie but a goodie in there, Infinimist. And technically speaking, I guess this is the 2.0 remastered Deus Ex 24/7 Nightmare Dreamscape version of that build. But funnily enough, we're not doing Corpse Explosion, although we are phantom eating corpses. I'll talk about that in the mechanics section. But what we're doing is actually playing off of the fact that Blood Mist is a blood skill. It can overpower. It attacks incredibly fast, even though it has a very low lucky hit chance. Oddly enough, attacking like dozens of times per second makes up for that. And then add on 2 very interesting uniques, one mythic unique and one regular unique, that both say either when you trigger a skill or when you trigger a cooldown. Rakanoth's boots finally has a use, and it's on this build right here. Now, what are we doing to actually scale damage? Well, our 3 damage instances that matter are Rakanoth's boots for a short range AoE damage that's fire based, meaning that we need generic multipliers to be able to make that do more damage. Tyrael's Might, which says every single time that you cast a skill, you're going to fire out holy bolts in every direction. This is physical damage, so it's a little bit easier to be able to scale it, but we don't have anything directly to work with it. And then lastly, Andariel's Visage. Now, Andariel's Visage and the damage over time that we apply to it is not nothing. We end up topping out around somewhere like 10 to 14 million DPS with just Andariel's. And theoretically speaking, we could actually build into scaling this significantly higher. It would just need better gear so I could drop one of my aspect slots and put on Fists of Fate of all things. But in stacking an insane amount of attack speed, you're able to re-trigger the cooldown and then recast a Blood Mist at exceptionally high rates. Overpowering with Blood Mist gets us Wrath Mist Chosen for an additional 50% attack speed. And then basically we just need to add on every single generic multiplier that will work with the majority of our damage, make sure we get close to crit cap, and this build kind of slaps. Now, while I have done tier 7 on it, in fact, you could go do a tier 8 on it as well. You are quite literally unkillable, and I think I only have 18,000 maximum life on this build. That's right, it's one of the only builds where speccing into maximum life is actually just a DPS loss, because you cannot be damaged while this is happening. The maximum damage output that we're talking about here is somewhere in the 100 million DPS range, and while that's fairly impressive and should be a big number, that realistically relegates you to tier 6 efficiently farming or tier 7 Infernal Hordes farming if you get really good boons and you get Hellborn as well as Soul Spires of all things. But all this is to say, this is unironically the dopest thing that I've ever piloted in this game. It might be the funniest build out of any build that's ever existed in Diablo 4. I have a planner for you down below, so you could just go ahead and look at that. I'm basically just going to put what I think the best version of this thing is. And hilariously enough, like, yes, Tyrael's Might is a huge amount of damage, and Andariel's Visage is a huge amount of damage. But technically speaking, all you need is Rakanoth's Wake to apply damage in general, and you'd be doing okay. Not great, but it's functional. But let me go ahead and talk about the mechanics of the bug first. Then the rest of the gear, our skills, what we sacrifice in our Paragon boards are going to make a lot more sense. but I can't stress enough. This is hilarious. It's strictly a bug. I assume at some point it'll get fixed. On top of that, this tech, if it isn't already, and I assume that it is, I'm not the only person to think about these things, could easily be implemented in any minion build since it only requires a single boot aspect. And that means that you can just be permanently invulnerable to damage while your minions just Shrek everything around you. The only issue with the build is finding ways to automate damage, because like I said before, not a lot of things work with this in the intuitive way that you expect them to. It is in the fact that they changed Blood Mist to be a cooldown skill that doesn't go on cooldown until the skill is done, and what you can do on mouse and keyboard that all of a sudden puts you into permanent Blood Mist. And if you look at the skills cooldown here, you notice that we are resetting it very, very fast. And that's because the game is operating at the maximum input that is possible. And the fun part about this, not only does attack speed further increase the rate that you can do this, but it also further increases the rate that Blood Mist itself applies damage. Now, the damage from Blood Mist isn't super important. You'll notice we're doing in the thousands here. With everything on it, you're going to be doing about 20,000 per tick. And if I were to try to count this very quickly, I'd say we're applying like, I don't know, 20 plus ticks per second. Maybe even more than that. It's kind of insane and almost impossible to be able to tell. But what that comes down to is about 1 million or 2 million DPS on full buff. But in merely adding this aspect to the build, Blood Mist will continue to generate corpses if you have it set to generate corpses, make you permanently invulnerable, give you permanent unstoppable, as well as making you unhindered, meaning that you can just stand in the middle of monsters. Add on to that, it's a blood skill, so we are able to benefit from a lot of things that specify only blood skills for their mechanics. But now that we understand that part about it, how does Rakanoth's Wake really work here? Well, it says that when you cast a skill, with a cooldown, you will explode. So now we get to infinitely trigger Blood Mist, which causes infinite triggers of Rakanoth's Wake. The faster that we cast Blood Mist with more attack speed, the faster we trigger Rakanoth's Wake. All right, great, we got that down pat. Tyrael's Might similarly says that while you're at full life, your skills unleash a barrage of divine damage. So what that means is that attempting to cast a skill, again, the corpse skills now need a target, but Blood Mist doesn't need a target for us to cast it. We can cast it as fast as our attack speed will allow us. So similar to the Rakanoth's Wake going off, now we can trigger Tyrael's Might going off. All right, great. We have all that said and done. Let's talk about Andariel's Visage. Andariel's Visage says lucky hit chance up to 20% to be able to trigger a Poison Nova. Now, Blood Mist has an abysmally small lucky hit chance, but what you need to understand is that the tooltip's lucky hit chance isn't necessarily the real lucky hit chance of the skill. This is just the front end, the user UI attempting to calculate and communicate to you the expected lucky hit chance over the duration of Blood Mist, because Blood Mist will actually hit targets multiple times. If I was close enough to this target, all those damage instances, ignoring this and ignoring this really quickly, but all of those damage instances that were just coming out all carry Blood Mist's lucky hit chance, which again, the faster we attack, the faster we apply damage instances, the faster Blood Mist can successfully trigger Andariel's Visage. So what that means is that while it's still not very high, your expected chance of being able to proc this thing, it's actually like fairly decently high. Every single time you see this little green explosion come out, that's Andariel's going off. But technically speaking, putting on a ton of lucky hit chance would vastly increase the rate at which we're able to proc Andariel's. You notice we're now procking it basically nearly multiple times per second, depending on how lucky we get. So I think that there is realistically an infamous version of this build with Andariel's and Fists of Fate. And all that I would need to figure out is how to be able to get the rest of the stats of my gear that I need. Maybe I'll include it down in the planner. Shoutouts in the comments if you want to see my theory craft for what this would look like. And basically, power to you. I went try to look up like a minimum damage roll with just lucky hit chance and just attack speed or just crit chance. And people are trying to sell these things for like 10 billion gold. Now, I don't have 10 billion gold. I don't know if you do. I know bots do, but like, damn son, I ain't got it like that. But all right, great. We know that we need the Creeping Mist. The Sacrilegious Soul is eating corpses for us, even though it's not really eating corpses for us. Andariel's is a huge amount of damage source, as well as an insane amount of attack speed. You basically want your plain attack speed capped and your secondary attack speed capped. And we could talk about a couple different ways that you could accomplish that. Tyrael's for damage. It does also offer survivability, but with about 18,000 maximum life. You really can't take a hit. You don't need to take a hit because you can be literally immune the entire time that you are inside of an Infernal Horde or in a pit or fighting a boss or during Helltide, whatever you're doing. You just have to hold down the buttons. So that's really not an issue. And then Rakanoths, again, for a huge amount of close AoE damage source. What's going to round out the rest of the build so that it's functional and you get all the different stats that you need? Well, first off, on the weapon, you're going to want to go with the slowest base weapon. Now you might be like, but you just said attack speed. You just said attack speed. I know, I did. The base weapon, though, is going to scale the effect on your gear. Now you notice that Andariel's has 147,000 poison damage over 5. But even if I were to go take something like the Grandfather and put it on, if you look at it again, you notice that the proc damage of this effect is going to go down. Now, Grandfather wouldn't be bad for this build at all. You can actually just toss on Grandfather as well if you really want to, but the lower speed of the base weapon is going to increase the damage from Rakanoths, going to increase the damage from Tyraels, and increase the damage from Andariels. We have so much attack speed. We're hitting the exact same attack speed breakpoints. Don't worry about that, but that's the most important part here. Then we basically want to stack on as many things that say damage as possible. This is a crit build. Theoretically, you also have 100% uptime on vulnerable. So either crit damage or vulnerable damage is great. Intelligence also scales the damage of all the effects from our gear. I had maximum life on this because oddly enough, all my items have maximum life on them. It's kind of the name of the game of this season, but you wouldn't want that at all. You would actually want intelligence, damage, and then crit damage or vulnerable damage here. Now you'll also notice that I had Bone Storm duration. In fact, in the first iteration of this build, I had a full bar of skills. I thought I was going to be reducing cooldowns and proccing Bone Storm and getting the benefits from it. You just don't have to. You just stay in Blood Mist the entire time. So the only thing that really care about here is the temper effect. And basically nothing else matters. So just the temper damage and then whatever weapon skill you kind of want to toss on there. Bone Storm duration, I guess, because technically speaking, you could put it on your skill bar just as a little burst window to be able to like make sure you get to 100% crit if your gear isn't good enough. Here's where we're putting Great Feast, because Great Feast is just a generic damage multiplier. We want as many of those as we can possibly get. For the gloves, at least for right now, we want even more intelligence, critical strike chance, and attack speed. We need at least one source of lucky hit chance to be able to apply vulnerable, because we have no other way of applying it with this build. We want as many lucky hit chance to be able to apply crowd control in the tempers, and then again, critical strike damage or vulnerable damage. Here's where we're putting Sacrificial. Sacrificial is going to make it so that Skirmishers is going to give us a ton of critical strike chance, Cold Mages will give us a ton of vulnerable damage, and then Golem is going to give us a ton of critical strike damage. You'll notice that with our gear as it currently stands, if I were to just put everything on, I'm currently sitting at a whopping 71.2 critical strike chance. You can get up to 100% critical strike chance just with these gear slots as they currently stand. You would just need greater affixes and to be able to masterwork crit on them. I do not have those on my gear, but that's what it would require. For the pants, as much intelligence as you can put on, I actually went and got armor capped just because it's like, you can and it's kind of easy. And then here's where we're putting Cursed Aura. Cursed Aura is great because we're just going to be sitting around in Blood Mist 100% of the time. And what that means is that we need to, again, automate as many things as possible. And then up to the Amulet. The interesting thing about the Amulet is that, again, we need generic damage multipliers. So we need Fueled by Death or Amplified Damage or Death's Embrace. You would want critical strike chance and attack speed here. I happen to have GA movement speed with a Fueled by Death Amulet. I went and put movement speed during Blood Mist just so that we can move around that much more quickly. This helps you get to new objectives faster, run around in the pit faster, get to bosses faster, etc. So having movement speed during Blood Mist is definitely really great. And since we have 100% uptime on it, you actually very easily can get up to the 200% movement speed total bonus. And it's the fastest I've ever felt on a Necro. We have to put Creeping Mist here because it's a mobility aspect. You can't put it on your boots because we're using unique boots. We would gladly have it down on a normal set of boots. And I'm even wondering about kind of dropping Rakanoth's Wake altogether, just relying on Tyrael's as well as Andariel's, just to be able to put another damage multiplier here and then pick up a pair of boots with multiple evade charges to be able to move faster and just get better overall tempers and effects on them. For one of your rings, you want crit chance, attack speed, intelligence. Again, you need at least one instance of a lucky hit chance to be able to apply vulnerable either on your glove or this ring. Go with the critical strike damage here. And then the other temper just kind of doesn't matter. You can go with ultimate cooldown if you are trying to use Bone Storm. I generally found that it just like wasn't important enough to drop out of Blood Mist just to cast it, but you could do that. And here's where we're putting Wrathmist Chosen. The fun part about Blood Mist, again, is that it is a blood skill, and we overpower with this blood skill all the time. You notice that this is my increased attack speed, and we are going to be overpowering basically all the time that you're actually inside of density. You'll see orange numbers are proccing out of here basically every single second. So you just have near permanent uptime on this. And even if you don't, our key passive is going to make us overpower often. And that means that we can re-trigger it. So you'll see that with Wrathmist Chosen up and, every once in a while picking up some blood orbs here, we do have 100% uptime on it. And then bringing the Sacrilegious Soul. The skill tree for this is going to look a little bit weird because, again, I was expecting to be actively using all the skills on the bar. But basically, you want Hued Flesh to be able to generate corpses because we're going to use Gravekeeper in our Paragon board. You want not even full ranks in a Blood Mist. I just had nowhere else to put these points. Blood Mist generates corpses. If you have plus ranks to skills, like on Sacrilegious Soul, you don't need to put a point into Corpse Explosion to put on your skill bar. But if you don't have it, you just put 1 point here. Maxing out Fueled by Death, obviously. Coming down, we're going to be picking up Decrepify with Abhorrent Decrepify. And you'll notice, again, I maxed out Iron Maiden, and I picked up Horrid Iron Maiden for even more damage on it. It's not a lot, but it's free and permanently applied to it. Maxing out Death's Embrace, maxing out Death's Approach. In the blood passives, you'd be like, oh, Mac, it looks like you're really maxing out the blood. Again, I just had nowhere else to put the points. So, Blood Mist is doing damage. I might as well buff it. I can fortify, so every once in a while when I do overpower, I'll get a little bit more damage out of that. And then transfusion is really the only blood thing that we care about. We're using this very specifically to be able to trigger Blood Begets Blood for a big damage multiplier when we pick up blood orbs. Gives us a little bit of a minigame to do while we're kind of just sitting there. And it's particularly nice because if you just stack right on top of a boss, the blood orbs generally generate so close to you that you automatically pick them up. So you just have a permanent uptime on that multi as well. Again, if you have Sacrilegious Soul, you don't need a point here, but just 1 point on Corpse Tendrils. The reason why I have it on the bar is because very specifically Sacrilegious Soul, when it triggers Corpse Tendrils, consumes a corpse. So it very slightly increases the rate that Flesh Eater is procced at. Again, Necrotic Carapace for some Fortified, just because it does help our overpower damage. We obviously want the crit chance, obviously want standalone. Now that I think about it, you don't even need the 3 points into standalone. You can take those out. I don't know where you put them, but you can do it. And then we do want the 3 points into Memento Mori. I thought about a lot of different things down here. Rathma's Vigor, just for the increased rate of overpowering, so you can start a fight with Rathma's Chosen already procced. The blood orbs are going to make you overpower a little bit more. Since we reset Blood Mist, you don't do a ton of overpowered damage instances before the next cast happens, but it's kind of something. We are going with an 8 glyph board in the Paragon here. In the starter board, we're going with Amplify for the 1.1 from Curses, and Blood Begets Blood Sacrificial since we don't have minions. Want to be picking up Blood Begets Blood Legendary Node. I do have all the maximum life nodes picked up, because that's just kind of how I'm used to pathing through boards. You don't need them. So there's an even more optimal version of this board somewhere. I'll try to come up with it for you. Over in Descent of Death, this is where we're putting Dominate. Since we do overpower enemies all of the time, that increases all of the damage that you do by 12%, not just overpower damage, which is something that I learned today. So shout outs to actually reading the entirety of this thing, but it means that we just have a free 12% multi because we will overpower often. Building over into Bone Graft, again, I'm picking up max life. You don't really need it. Technically speaking, increases your overpower damage. Here's where we're putting Essence for the crit damage multi. Building down into Hulking Monstrosity, this is Control, just for the 1.2 when we CC monsters or when we stagger bosses. Building over into Cult Leader, this is where I'm currently putting Corporeal. Now, Corporeal only increases the damage from Tyraels, so I don't think that this is the best option, but you kind of run out of good glyphs. So it's sure, I'll increase 1/3 of the damage that I'm doing. Building down into Bloodbath, this is where we're putting Exploit. And then we finish off the boards in Flesh Eater. In Flesh Eater, we're currently putting Gravekeeper for the multi for all the corpses around us, since we don't consume them fast enough to really get rid of them. And then obviously the Legendary Note. Now, where would I tier this build? It's got to be a C tier build. Realistically, I think on maximum gear, max GAs, and max masterwork crits, everything kind of optimal where it needs to be. You could fairly competently and confidently speed farm tier 7s. You would struggle in tier 8s just because the bosses have way too much life, but you would kill them eventually. So even if you just wanted to do that for the lark of it, you could go ahead and do it. The gear is ridiculous. It does want 2 mythic uniques to be the perfect version of it. I was running it even without Andariel's, and while it wasn't good, it was significantly worse. It did allow you to have explosive mist on, so that you always had that backup plan of like recasting blood mist in case something goes wrong, or you're just kind of butterfingers or you don't notice anything. The fun part about it is like it's perfect for hardcore because you're unkillable. It's perfect for minion builds who were trying to find ways of surviving, going so far as to run Tyrael's Might for enough survivability, whereas now you can just run your full minions, put this aspect on your boots, and then you can rebuild into Golem as well to be able to have a huge amount of damage on it. That might be like a revelation. It like hit me up if people are already doing that. I know there's much smarter people than I when it comes to minion builds out in the wild. Let me know if they're doing that. And if they did, I called it. But I think this is hilarious. I think this is the funniest build I've ever played, hands down. It's technically the strongest build because it's quite literally unkillable. You physically cannot die unless you just stop clicking buttons. But like at that point, nobody's going to save you. Does all content, does tormented bosses, does Uber Lilith, does tier 7 hordes, could struggle through tier 8 hordes, obviously would do absolutely fine out in like Helltide, or if you're just doing Whispers or Nightmare Dungeons. It's kind of a powerhouse. I like it. Now, because it's predicated on so many bugs, I don't think I'll ever do much more than maintain a planner for this. And if you don't know, I have all my planners down in my Discord for things that don't necessarily have the chops to be able to make it up on the max roll. That's where I'll typically keep them so that people who have seen my videos and want to be able to refer back to it can just find it there. So check out the Discord link in the description below. I'd love to have you there regardless. We got a ton of great nerds in there. I'd love to see you. If this is your first time in the channel, go ahead and subscribe. You don't want to miss out on any of these types of things. I'm trying to break the game whenever I can. And luckily we were able to find this one before they fixed it. So people can go ahead and enjoy it for as long as it stays in the game. Toss a like onto the video as well if you enjoyed it. It would mean the world to me. Thank you so much. I think we're like just around the corner from 60,000 subscribers, which is an insane number. So if you're brand new here and you haven't clicked it yet, join along for the ride. I'd love to see whoever gets the 60,000 subscriber, and I'd like for that to happen before the end of the year. It'd be a huge goal of mine. But thank you so much. That's enough of me shilling for myself. I really, really hope that you enjoyed this. Thank you so much for watching the video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.